Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello everybody, welcome to episode 53 already of the podcast. And this one I'm going to talk a little bit about the worst advice that you can get when it comes to martial arts. And I'll explain in a little bit. First, as always, the quick shout out to this time all my patrons, because I did kind of a special offer earlier this month, and it was basically me giving out the entire archive of my newsletter. And that's a newsletter that I've been writing for about 4 years almost now for my patrons. Just gave the entire news archive to everybody who joined and stayed. So in these difficult times for everybody, I just wanted to say thank you to all of my patrons for their support. It means the world to me, and it actually makes this podcast, amongst many other things, possible. And just wanted to say thank you guys, appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the plus 80,000 words that you get to read now. So that said, let's just get straight into it. In this episode, I'm going to talk about something that I just posted in my martial arts and self-defense group on Facebook. So I'll put a link in the show notes, but you can go there, and it's basically called You Are Not Ares. That's the name of the group. So you're not Ares, God of War. Why? Well, because I didn't want to have a Facebook group like you see in so many cases, and there it's just... a bunch of people talking all sorts of nonsense and keyboard warriors and all that kind of stuff. And I don't want to have anything to do with that. It's just a waste of time. I'm too old for that. Been online in various groups and forums and so on for several decades now. So been there, done that. Didn't want to have that for my own group. I also have a set of rules. Bunch of rules that you have to adhere to just to have a good conversation and so on. And, for the most part, this goes very smoothly. There's been only a few minor hiccups where I had to be a strict moderator. But other than that, it's gone great. Now, and obviously, if you want to join, you're more than welcome. Now, what I did is last night I posted a question. And I said, what is the worst advice on martial arts you ever received? And I just wanted to see what people would react with, because I know what I heard, but I was curious to know what everybody else was going to write up. And we have 40 plus comments so far. So I'll start with mine and give you a few of the ones that people wrote and give my thoughts on that. So the first one, that is mine. And perhaps the worst advice I ever had was, if you tear a muscle while stretching, it heals and becomes stronger. And that is just total and complete nonsense. If you tear a muscle while stretching, what happens is that it is torn and it needs to heal. When it heals, what will happen is that there will be scar tissue. Scar tissue is not functional muscle tissue. It does not work anymore. That's what a scar is. It doesn't contribute to the strength of the muscle in a sense that the muscle's fibers in that scar tissue can't contract anymore because they've turned into scar tissue. So they're pretty much useless. And depending on how severe that tear is, you might actually have severe weakened function in that muscle. You might actually end up with a lot of other problems when, for instance, the muscle that you tore does not heal correctly, so that the scar tissue heals and the fibers heal in the wrong direction, give you all sorts of trouble. But also you might lose strength there, which causes an imbalance in your body, and you end up having loads of other problems, not necessarily right away, but in the long run, because one muscle isn't pulling its weight anymore. It cannot do its job correctly anymore. And as a result, other muscles have to compensate. And we know now that one of the major contributors to injuries, whether it's for martial arts or any physical activity, is an imbalance in the body. One side is stronger than the other side. One part is, for instance, not performing correctly, and the other parts have to compensate. You've got one leg that is shorter than the other. You've got one side of your hips that is a lot more stiff than the other side. So there's an imbalance in flexibility. You've got an overdeveloped right arm and your left arm is underdeveloped, and so on. So all these imbalances create a lot of problems. Now, we all have them. We're not machines. We're not perfect. What happens is that we have these usually small imbalances that we don't feel because our body can compensate up to a certain degree. But then you get like a huge muscle tear and you think like, oh, this is awesome. I'm going to get stronger now because that guy, that douchebag in the dojo or in the gym told me that. And he was doing this whole macho thing where, eat the pain and keep going. And it doesn't matter if you're injured, just keep going, be a warrior, blah, blah, blah. And you don't take care of that injury. And you think like, well, I don't feel it anymore, so I must be stronger. And then you end up with, for instance, a pulled hamstring muscle that doesn't function correctly anymore because you've got a huge tear that you didn't take care of. And then you start developing gait problems, you start developing coordination problems and so on. And all of a sudden, your back hurts because that hamstring muscle was actually fundamental in making your posterior chain work correctly, and it's not doing its job anymore. Again, this doesn't happen overnight, but it takes time. And if you believe some people when they, like the guy told me that, fortunately I was already, enough informed and knowledgeable on how the human body works that I knew that this was total nonsense. But a lot of people will take that one away and apply it and then don't understand why they are having so much trouble and so many injuries. So that is the first one. Next one, Peter. He said what he received as horrible advice was, you are short, so get inside their guard and stay there. Okay, now, in and of itself, that's not necessarily the worst advice if you're fighting a taller guy that you try to get closer. But it's as if not a single tall guy in the world ever figured that out. Like, I am taller than this guy. What would he do to get to me? I'm sure it's going to be staying at a distance where I have an advantage. That makes perfect sense. He will absolutely try to fight me from the outside. No, of course. He knows that you're going to try to get inside. Of course. And any martial artist or self-defense practitioner worth his salt, when you're tall, you know that the guy is going to try to close the distance and get inside. And you will have counters for that. You will expect it. So it's one of those things that that people are sometimes, I'd say, not necessarily, giving bad advice per se, but more along the lines of that it's such a cliche, it's such a just such an easy answer that it's okay, it's not wrong per se, but it doesn't help all that much. It's like giving a very general answer to a much more complex and nuanced problem. So yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're tall, keep them at the end of your jab. Okay, duh, obviously, everybody knows that. But what if you can't? Okay, well, you have an answer for that. And you train for those situations where you cannot do the preferred strategy or use the preferred tactics for whatever your physical or other advantages are when in contrast with your opponent. So that's the one from Peter. Next one, Jerry. So I love that one. Just keep repeating the motion and one day it will click and you will be able to use it. And he called that magical advice for form-based traditional martial arts. So just keep repeating the motion and one day it will click and you will be able to use it. Nonsense. If nobody explains to you why you have to do that movement and how and so on, you don't just magically become skillful at using it and applying it correctly. That's just not how it works. There are many stories in, for instance, Chinese martial arts where the founder of a style had this dream and there was this deity or whoever you wanna dream of, that came to him in a dream, and he saw how he should fight, and he developed his own style according to that. Yeah, that's nonsense just as much. It's like, okay, well, if I just think about it, it automatically reveals itself to me. Same thing, if you just keep repeating the motion over and over again, eventually it will reveal itself. That's just not how it works. And that's pretty much how nothing works. I mean, just imagine that you go to university and you are, I don't know, let's say studying physics, and you come to class and the professor says, you know what, I want you to study this equation here, and just keep on reading it, and eventually you'll get it. It'll click, you'll get it, and you will be able to use it and send a rocket into space, whatever. No, that professor gets kicked out of college. Well, no, nowadays maybe he gets tenure, but because things are getting... Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. But the point is that this is not how somebody teaches. So yes, forms have their place. They have value for traditional martial arts, but they are not an end goal in and of themselves. They are meant to teach you certain things in a certain way. But if you don't learn what they're there for, you don't know why you do the movements, then you won't automatically get a better understanding of the techniques. And for sure, you will not know why they are in the form, why every single detail you're supposed to get right is there. And you can forget about ever being able to apply it automatically, because you have no idea what you're doing. You're just moving. It's dance. You're just dancing to a tune only you can hear, and you're imagining your movements, and you're imagining the meaning they have. And maybe you could be right every now and then, but overall, you're by far not going to be effective simply because you're like, oh, yeah, I think this is it. Ooh, I've been doing this for 15 years now. Now I know what this means. I think this is a high block followed by a punch, and actually it's just grabbing somebody by the face and pulling them down into a takedown. So you don't know. You need explanations. You need a teacher, right? So next one, and this one is also from Jerry, and he prefaces that with, "This one will make some unhappy," and I can see that. A few people will disagree with me on this one. Okay, so worst advice: the most important thing to train are principles. I disagree with that. Now, I remember back in the day when aliveness was the bang word in the martial arts and self-defense community many years ago, and then it became principle-based training and all those things. I don't have anything against them per se, and they have their place and importance just like many other things. However, I think it's a little bit less now, but a while ago there was this whole thing, well, it's just the principles are the most important thing. And you have to train those, and everything else then falls into place. And that's what Sherry says. The most important thing to train are principles. And I'll read first what he said. He says, principles are the most important, but they come through training techniques, tactics, and strategies. If you don't have the grounding in fundamentals, the principles are merely lip service. And I agree with that. Yes, the principles are important. Yes, you have to understand them. But you do not get a thorough understanding of them. Neither do you get skill by simply training a principle in a void. Just doing your thing and trying to use that principle void of everything else that comes along with it. You need to train the specific techniques. You need to understand the tactics involved and the strategies that are overarching and are driving the principles. Which means that a lot of the training, if you have no context to place those principles in, then you only have a very limited and shallow understanding of the principles, as opposed to when you have done a lot of practice and you understand everything else that comes with it and how the principle applies in different contexts, in different ways, in different situations. That's when you get the true knowledge that you're looking after. So it's not either or. it's not, well, if I train principles, all the techniques aren't important, and vice versa. It's also not that, well, I just have to train techniques and collect all the techniques, and then the principles, I don't need those. No, it's both. You need both. And I know this is kind of what we call cursing in the church over here, so it's forbidden, it's not done. Now, I apologize to everybody who just got his panties in a wad. I mean, I'm so sorry that you feel very offended by this, but this is how I see things, and I don't think I am wrong in this one. Now, mind you, I made a nuanced statement. I didn't say, well, principles suck and techniques are the best thing ever, and vice versa. I didn't say that. I said you need both. And the idea of saying that, well, the most important thing are principles, there are so many examples that I could give that where principles actually fight each other, where they rub against each other and there's friction, where one principle says one thing and the other one says something that is seemingly at odds with it. And then you have to understand that, well, this is the nuance. Here is where that principle stops and where the other one takes over, and vice versa. And the only way to do that is by having all that context and that training in the techniques and tactics and so on. So you understand why one principle takes a dominance over the other in certain contexts. All right. A great one from Pat Johnson, and I'll read you his full quote. Worst advice ever. If you're ever attacked with a knife, put your shoes on your hands. If you're ever attacked with a knife, put your shoes on your hands. And he commented that, difficult for an adult to say something so odd, even a 7-year-old questions it. And I can only agree with that. This is along of the lines of the advice that a lot of people gave, like, yeah, well, if you're faced with a knife, just wrap your jacket around your forearm. No, just putting your shoes on your hands means that, well, your hands might not get cut right away, but you've basically given up any means of actually controlling the attacker's knife. And if you ever end up being able to catch it, and with knife hand, I mean the entire arm, the entire body. The other thing you can do is maybe hit a little bit harder if you have city shoes that have a heel that is quite hard. But why would you put your shoes on your hands? If you want to use it as some sort of improvised sap, you can most certainly do that in other ways than putting your hands inside your shoes. So it's one of those things, and there's another one that I will give you right away, and that's one is from Biba, and it says, on the street, just go for the eyes. Duh, yeah, of course that works, but that's the only thing, and then that solves everything? It's just complete and utter nonsense. It's just, yeah, if you're attacking the street, just attack the guy's eyes. Just take his eyes out. Take his eye out. Yeah, you can go for that. It's as if nobody's ever thought of that technique, and that they don't expect somebody to go for the eyes, aka attack you. Now, if you want to punch him in the face, or if you want to hit him in the eyes, you're going to have to go more or less in the same direction with your technique. So just going for the eyes is advised, like, okay, whatever. Now, let's put it in another context, and then we talk about, well, okay, on the street, you just go for the eyes, and it's this drunk guy that is annoying you, and you take his eye out, and then you end up being headline news, because everybody's got a cell phone, and they see this drunk guy accosting you a little bit and annoying you, not really being all that aggressive, and you go all Kung Fu superstar on the guy, and you take out one of his eyes. Guess who's going to jail? So on the street, there is a lot more than just maiming techniques. Not everything requires you go full ninja on somebody and take them out and blind them. It could also be that you just need to push the guy away from you and just take off, start running. And if he's too drunk to follow, that's it, you fixed it. You don't need to do all your fancy moves of death. And I know, yeah, just go for the eyes doesn't necessarily mean taking the eye out. But every time you attack the eye, you might damage it to the point of blindness. So that's always on the table. All right, next one. This one is from Zachariah, and his advice that he received was, it's always been done this way. it's always been done this way. And his comment is, yes, this is right, sometimes. But if you can't give me the reasoning, it's terrible advice. Exactly. I agree. If you just say like to a student when they ask you something as a teacher, say, well, this is why we do it. Because why? Well, because we've always done it this way. Yeah, that's not an explanation. That's like when a child asks something to its parents, and the parents say, because what? Well, because I say so. That's horrible advice. Again, contrast this with going through pretty much any school, whether it's primary school all the way to the best universities in the world. If that's the answer they give, then everybody would go like, what kind of teacher are you? What kind of idiot are you? It's always been done this way. It's not an answer. If you are teaching, you're supposed to know why certain things are done. Now, there are certain questions that you don't have an answer to, and then you say, I don't know, or we don't know, or the current status of the science is that X, Y, and Z is what we think is happening over here, but we might change our mind if new information comes available. Or you might say that nobody knows the answer to this. This is still being investigated. But just saying like, yeah, we've always done it this way, so we'll keep on doing it, that's not an answer. And in particular, because martial arts evolve. Why? Well, because the world changes. And I've said this story many times before, and I'll say it again. But there was an interview with Danilo Santo many years ago, and it's on YouTube somewhere, so you can find it there. And he was asked, why is there such dominance of defenses against the sidekick in Jeet Kune Do? And he said that, look, back in the day when Bruce Lee developed that style, that was pretty much what everybody was doing. Loads and loads of sidekicks. So he developed a lot of defensive techniques against that. And I said, my reaction was, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now apply that to whatever traditional style that you're studying, or even, a combative style that is from the Second World War, for instance, which a lot of people are definitely into right now. Okay, well, how has society changed? How has violence changed? What is more common now that wasn't before, and vice versa? And how do you adapt your techniques and style and system to it? And that's what I mean with, if it's always been done this way, well, yeah, but nobody's doing that anymore. So why nobody's doing that attack anymore? So why would we keep working on this technique? And there might be solid reasons for that, but you have to know them as a teacher. Or you might eventually decide that, you know what, this is an antiquated technique. We're not going to use that anymore. For instance, you might, if you have a really old system, you might have a technique that is specifically for a halberd. Well, hardly anybody uses that anymore. So the relevance to using those kind of techniques in today's context is pretty damn low. So maybe this is an antiquated technique. And even then, you still have to think about it. But just saying like, well, we're just going to keep doing this because it's always been done this way. Yeah, but halberd is not a spear, is not a staff, is not a sword. So if it's specific for that particular weapon and it doesn't apply to any other weapon, maybe we don't need that anymore. Maybe that it's always been done this way doesn't really apply here. Right. So next one. And as you guys can tell, I'm having a lot of fun with this. I want to say thank you to all the members of my Facebook group for generously contributing to my fun. Next one, James. He says, worst advice. This is our version of a front kick. Throw it like this, and it is impossible to block. Again, the guy who said that is full of it. There's no such thing as impossible to block. It doesn't exist. Maybe more effective in whatever style that you're practicing. If you say like, well, this is how we throw a front kick, and if you do it this way, it is more effective than doing it the other way for this and this reason. I could get behind that. But the whole idea of something being impossible to block is it's just so wrong. It's just so stupid and silly and self-absorbed and narcissistic that I don't know where to start. I remember this is many years ago. I've told the story also, but this one guy was sent to me by another teacher when I was still teaching Sanda, and he was apparently one of the best fighters in that teacher's class, and the teacher was having trouble containing him. He had a little bit of an ego. He was a young guy, early 20s, I think, and he sent him to me to train. It became very clear that he sent them to me to teach the kid a lesson. I don't appreciate being used in that way. It was, once the guy arrived, then I saw what it was there, and I couldn't kick him out because he wasn't doing anything wrong per se. But I said, okay, do some shadow boxing. I watched him. I said, look, okay, practice this and this and this. And because there were a lot of fundamental errors in what he did, and he was unable to stick to what I asked him to do, and he got bored, and very quickly he said, I know all this already. And at that point, if you're arrogant enough to tell a teacher in the very first class of his that you attend that you know that already, when he in particular gives you something to practice, rational discussion is probably out of the window. I'm too old for that kind of nonsense, so I'm like, okay. Now, I said, okay, you know what? Let's do some sparring. And he sparred, and he had a lot of high kicks, a lot of flashy kicks, and he was committed. And I said, fine, okay. So what are your best kicks? And he liked high kicks and spinning kicks and so on. I said, okay, you can do your best techniques as hard as you can, and I would just use my jab. Long story short, next round he couldn't lay a hand on me, and I jabbed him in the face several times. Not that hard. Just popped him in the nose a little bit. There was no blood or anything, no black eyes. Just he couldn't understand. And the reason why I tell that story is that the look on his face at the end of that was that he knew that he was awesome. He had faith in his technique, and he knew that he would be able to land them until all of a sudden it didn't work anymore. So that whole idea of nobody can block this. This is the best technique ever, or I am so good that I can beat everybody up. Same thing. It's just complete nonsense until you find somebody who actually has an answer for that, or you realize all of a sudden that there are levels of skill and experience much higher than yours. And I was kind to that kid. I mean, I didn't hurt him at all. He never came back because he couldn't handle the facing the fact that he wasn't as good as he thought he was. I've been on the receiving end of that as well. I mentioned many times how I started in Tai Chi Chuan, and the smallest guy in class just tossed me around like a rag doll. I'm like, okay, A, that stings my ego, ouch. But B, next thought was like, I got to learn this stuff. This is awesome. And that was over 20 years ago, and I never looked back. So I just signed up with my teacher right away. So when people tell you like this is the best technique ever, nobody can block this or nobody can defend against this, just walk away. And that brings me to the next one, which is kind of like a similar thing. Hank says, worst advice ever. This always works, and cut here, cut here, cut here, and cut here, and you'll be fine. And he comments, no mention of the legal ramifications of cutting there and there and there. Yeah, so this always works. Again, it's nonsense. You would think that somebody who gets shot in the heart, in the head, in the brain, whatever, is going to drop down and die. One of the stories that Lauren Christensen told me, we were talking about it, I forget what it was, but it said that one time there was this bank robbery that went wrong. Bank robber came running outside and started shooting, if I'm not mistaken, and the police officers fired back, and he had multiple bullets in his body, including one that was through his heart, and he still managed to run away and run behind the corner off towards the next block, where he promptly fell dead. And he did fall dead, but he had still enough juice to keep going for several seconds and be dangerous at that point. So that idea of that, this always works is nonsense. I once wrote a blog post, and I forget where it was. This guy I think he had like 25 bullets in him, and he was still alive. He survived, actually, being shot 25 times. And there were bullets in vital organs to boot. So all this kind of stuff, this always works. I mean, I saw a video a while ago, and I posted it on my Facebook, I think, a while ago. And there's this a bunch of people sitting in a car, and there's this one person pulls out a gun, just a handgun. I forget. I don't think it was a high caliber. It was pretty light round, I think. And they're just playing around with the gun and recording themselves, and the gun goes off, and it just goes off into the temple of that guy, almost at contact range, just really short, close range, goes off. You see the blood spouting out of the side of his head, and you're like, okay, that guy's a goner. Nope, he survived. He had to relearn how to walk, but he survived. So the idea of this always works. Again, it's people who speak in absolutes. You know what the Jedi say about that. So I'm not going to mention that again. But this idea of that, do this, and this, and you'll be fine. It's nonsense. And I'll tell you a story from my misspent youth. Many years ago, when I was a teenager, where we would hang out, and it was not really a dive or anything. It's just this is where the kids would hang out, and there were also older people there. There was this biker who used to come there. There was a small, not really a biker gang, but a bunch of guys who'd ride together, and one of them was like giant level tall and really big and muscular. He was a very sweet, nice guy. I mean, nobody ever had any problems with him as far as I know, and we went to the parties where these guys showed up as well, so everything was fine. But obviously he was intimidating. He would hardly fit on his bike, and he was just huge and all decked out in leather and jeans, and so intimidating guy when you're 16, 17. And one time, one of the guys I knew and I were talking, and this really young guy, he was 14, he was like, yeah, but sure, he's big, but they said that he has like a weak spot, and if you hit him there, he can't do anything and he's out. And we were like, what are you talking about? Yeah, you gotta hit him in his bad knee, and then he's gonna go down because he's got a bad knee and he can't defend himself anymore, and you can beat him. and I was like, dude, you've got zero idea what you're talking about. You've never been in a fight in your life, and if you think that you can just take that guy's knee out and he's gonna go down, good luck with that. Go with God, vaya con Dios, man, because you are not gonna survive that one. So that the whole concept of this always works is just forget about it. All right, so I'm going to do one more because we've been going for about half an hour. A quick one from Tony. If you run up behind Mike Tyson and slap him really hard in the ass, he will think it's really funny. Not sure if Tony is being serious, but I wanted to include that one because I think it's quite funny. Another one from Quint, which I think is horrible advice, having gone through surgery myself. The worst advice he ever got was, this is how you strengthen your rotator cuffs, and you want to use the heaviest weights you can. For those of you who don't know, the rotator cuff is a bunch of muscles in your shoulder that stabilize it and assist with moving your arm. I had surgery when one of my rotator cuff muscles was completely torn off, and the cuff itself, the capsule of the shoulder was torn as well. It's you don't want to go there. You do not want to tear off your rotator cuff muscles. And if you use heavy weights, these muscles are tiny. They're really small. If you use heavy weights, they will become damaged and they will tear off. And then you are in for, well, surgery takes a few hours at most usually. That's not as bad, but then you wake up, you've got an arm that you can't move, and then the first month you can hardly do anything. It takes at least 3 months of rehab, and let's just say that at the very least 4 or 5 months until you can start light training again, let alone impact. And recovery generally, like the full 100%, if you can get it at all, because I lost some mobility in my right arm because of the surgery. If you can get it to 100%, take about a year. So by all means, train your rotator cuff muscles. They're important. Stability in the shoulder is important, but do not use heavy weights. Please don't. Right. So let me see if I can do one more. And that is, Jonathan says, worst advice ever. Free sparring is too dangerous. That's why we don't practice it in Aikido. I am going to push back a little bit on that one. Now, the reason why is this. Many techniques many styles, don't have sparring in it because the sparring environment is not where you can learn the techniques the best possible way. And if you do the technique right in a sparring context, it's too dangerous in the sense that either you hold back, or if you do it wrong or you go too far, or the opponent is going to end up resisting in an incorrect way, you actually damage somebody. Now, let me give you an example. And I always get pushback from the MMA guys and the Muay Thai guys and so on. I said, okay, it's fine. Okay, here's an example. You still have rules in MMA. You still have rules in Muay Thai. You're not allowed to hit the back of the head in MMA now. Why? Because it's too dangerous. Because that's where you end up getting really injured and damage the brain. You're not allowed to spike somebody on his head, meaning you do a throw, let's say a typical suplex like you see in wrestling, where you toss the guy on top of his head. Why? Because it's too dangerous. You end up injuring and crippling and killing people like that. You're also not allowed to attack the eyes. Why? Because it's too dangerous. You're not allowed to attack small joints, fingers and toes. Why? Because it's too dangerous. It creates too many injuries. Again, so this whole idea that there is this ultimate level of sparring where everything is allowed. No, there's not. Stupid people do that, and young people, and that included me, because I've done that kind of stupid stuff when I was younger, where you spar without rules and anything goes, and you can do that, but you end up injured. Why? Because when you're playing high stakes and you know that anything goes, and so does your partner, and you're not holding back because you're like, holding back is for sissies, and we don't do that. We train hardcore because we're real men. Okay, then you end up breaking fingers, spraining wrists, and poking out eyes, and creating a bunch of injuries, because that's how real fighting often is that once you play for keeps, well, things happen fast, and human beings are this really bizarre, really contradictory thing where on the one hand we're incredibly tough, we can take a lot of punishment, and on the other hand there's things that we cannot stand and just injure us instantly. Like if you twist a finger the right way, it just snaps, it breaks. If you move somebody's leg on the ground in a certain way, you're gonna just rip out his knee and it's off. In a sense that everything on the inside of that knee is just torn off. You could actually trip somebody, throw him, or make him fall in such a way that he injures his knee on the way down, that he rips his own knee basically out of the socket. You could step on somebody's foot and push him to the ground and keep your pressure on that foot, and he's going to mess up his ankle instantly because his weight is doing all the work, which is one of the reasons why stepping on feet in boxing is prohibited. You're not allowed to do that. So my point is that in many cases, trying to do your techniques the way they are meant to be used for real is indeed too dangerous. Best example, weapons. I practice several arts where we use weapons, edged weapons, or weapons that are fairly heavy. And that if you spar all out with the right weapons, and even with practice weapons, you end up getting serious injuries. Even when practicing the techniques in a non-sparring way, but just going all out, meaning you attack ferociously with strength and speed with that weapon. I've seen people just just basically freak out because all of a sudden it was real and mess up their technique and get injured. Or you lack the control once you go with more speed and power. And there were incidents in a style that I practice where somebody hit somebody else with a spear and just missed the eye and hit the eye socket. And very, very lucky, that one person, that it wasn't in his eye itself, because he would have lost it. And that was just regular practice. So free sparring in certain contexts is not really going to work. Now, Aikido is not kickboxing, is not Muay Thai. It was never meant to be used for sparring. There's also the connection with weapons that is directly there, whether what you practice with weapons also is supposed to be, you're supposed to be able to do it without weapons, and vice versa. So I understand that that idea of why you don't do certain things, and you say that sparring is too dangerous. At the same time, what I absolutely disagree with as well is that people use that as an excuse to not train hard and to not test themselves more rigorously. Like, and there's so much of that in the martial arts as well. Yeah, but this is, we're so dangerous that we can't do this and that. Yeah, and then I see you do a technique and you can't punch your way out of a wet paper bag. So then, yeah, okay, you're just using it as an excuse to not have to test yourself. Because taking the example of Aikido, Osensei Ushiba was a badass when he was younger. He was strong, he was muscular, and he was rough with his students. Again, look up the students that were with him before the Second World War, and you will hear accounts of some extremely brutal training. So the whole idea that you cannot practice in an efficient manner in Aikido is nonsense. It's just that at the later stages of his life, Ushiba found religion. Again, I'm simplifying, but we don't have the time to go into depth in that. But he found religion, and that was all Aikido was about love and this and that. But when he was younger, it was not about love at all. And a lot of stuff he did, well, in a free sparring context, if you're a little bit off, then you end up injuring people. And the same applies to many other techniques. I mean, if you see some of the injuries that you see in some of the BJJ classes and gyms that you see nowadays, I mean, some of the guys who roll hard, they're just all messed up. Why? Because they do their equivalent of free sparring, and they go at it too hard, and they crank the locks and the chokes and so on. I mean, really, really hard, and you end up injuring people. So what I want to say is that at a certain point, pretty much any art or system is going to end up being too dangerous for completely free sparring. Why? Well, because that's just how it is. And take, for instance, fencing. Fencing is a martial art. They put protective gear on, they put the masks on, they have the special clothing that they wear. And even then, there are injuries that the weapon snaps in half, and that it's just as, for instance, one of the fencers does a lunge and his sword snaps, and there's an edge all of a sudden, and he falls forward, and it goes into the other guy, and he's injured. So even doing it as safely as possible, there's still this risk of injury. And that's why we have rules, why we have regulations. That's why sparring is done in a certain format and so on. It's when you disregard everything that then, well, eventually, you end up being injured. So other than this one, I am going to say, well, I get what you mean. And up to a certain point, I very much agree with that idea that it's nonsense, that free sparring is too dangerous. That's why we don't practice it. But I think that there's also a place for it where, well, free sparring maybe not that way. Same thing as the example that I sometimes give is that you might do force and force training when you are working with firearms in certain law enforcement and military and so on, where you have simunitions or something else along those lines, where it hurts when you get shot, but it's still not, you don't necessarily die, even though there can be serious injuries with that. But you're using the weapon that you would use on the job, but you're using ammunition that is non-lethal, right? Despite doing that kind of training, and it's very realistic, it feels very real, it's still not the same thing as using live ammo. You can't do that because then people die. So even at the extreme ends, there is always a point at which you get where it's too dangerous to do it that way, meaning it's too dangerous to do it without any constraints, without any restrictions for safety. Right, guys, that is it. We've come to the end of it. This is about a little bit over, I think, 45 minutes. So we're going to stop here. This was a lot of fun. Again, thank you to all my members of the Martial Arts Self-Defense group on Facebook. Again, the link will be in the show notes. And you can find the show notes if you go to wimsblog.com/53, the number 53, and everything will be there. All right, guys, take care, be safe, and I'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.